So the next thing that we're going to take a look at is kind of the background on how to design a screen. So if you open up your designer, and close my folder here. So if you go ahead and open up your designer by going to Programs, Start Programs, Reform MOST version 2, and you have your designer shortcut here. And what it starts with is basically a blank screen. Over on the right side here, you have several tabs and collections. What I'm going to do on the right side here under my collections, I have this Save to File. So if you just go ahead and double click on that, should begin to open two screens. You can see the designer has like a tab view, so you could go between different screens here. And they essentially look exactly how it would look on the, I open up my emulator and I go to my Save to File. You can see here, so if you take a look, you can see here I have the word file name, and this is just a label. You can see on my emulator it looks exactly the same. Same thing for Save to File. I have a text box here. In my designer, we have our text box, my tree view, which shows my directory listing, as well as my scan setting. And to create objects on the form, let's say I wanted to put a label. A label is just text that displays on the screen. The user can't click on it or press on it at all. I'm just going to drag this on my screen, maybe down here at the bottom. The name doesn't matter. When you drag an object onto your tab, there's actually this kind of nice wizard that walks you through each of the steps or each of the properties of it, so you can modify it easily. I'm going to make this a large font size to make it, what's a good color? Maybe green. I want this left align type. I'm just going to put my name here. And when I press finish, see it changed the way it looked. I'm just going to stretch it a little bit so I can make sure it fits the entire text. You can see here now on my designer, I have this nice label. If I save this, it's automatically updated. Now, all we have to do to make this appear on our emulator is basically log off and log back in to refresh the screen. So if I press my logout button, once I have my label here and I saved it, I press logout. I'm just going to log in again with demo and demo. And here you see my emulator. The text is already there. Every machine on your system, essentially, as soon as somebody walks up and tries to use it again, it would automatically update the screen. Typically, once it's in production, you have the ability to set a timeout so that after maybe, say, 30 or 60 seconds, if somebody's not using it, it would automatically log them out so that the next time that somebody logs in, it would automatically be updated. So it updates rather quickly. So if you have this on, say, 100 machines, as soon as somebody goes to use it, it's automatically up, which makes it much easier to manage than if you had to update each one manually. So what you have here is basically a what you see is what you get kind of interface. It's rather simple to drag objects onto it. Well, we have two kind of setups that we can go through demonstrating a screen. Out of curiosity, I guess we could do database first. If we want to create a new screen, I'm just going to click the X here on these tabs so I close them. And what we can do is say File. I need to go to File, New. And here you see we have different screens to select. You have HVGA, WVGA, and SVGA. HVGA is, I believe, like a black and white screen, or it's a slightly smaller screen. You have WVGA, which is what the emulator is currently displaying, and then you have SVGA, which is slightly larger. And you have the ability to create any of these three, and once you create a screen in one, you can actually convert it to another one rather easily, which I'll go over after we design our screen. So when I click on File, New, and I select WVGA, we have this wizard that comes up to create a new tab. The name of the tab, somewhat important later on, but at this point it doesn't really matter to us, so I'm just going to call it MOST Database Sample. We're going to press Next. Now the alias, you can see I named my tab MOST Database Sample, which is a rather large name. And displaying it out on the screen, it kind of takes up too much room. So you can see here, for our tab in the emulator, we have the word manual. The alias is basically what you would see on the screen instead of the actual name of it. So here I'm just going to say STF sample. And hopefully it's wide enough to fit that whole text. I'm not sure if it will or not. Next, it will ask me if I want to add this to a collection. We already discussed that a collection is basically a group of tabs. When it asks me this, I'm just going to select Save to File, because for now that's what I'd like to add it to make it kind of simple. So once you move this to the right, you see under Added, you have Save to File. I click Next. I'd like to add this to user demo, so I just want to check him for users and groups, and I'm going to press Finish. So now you can see I have my screen here, and this is how I would typically start designing my tab. Once you have your new tab here, first thing we'd like to do if we follow this PowerPoint we have is we want to drag a list box onto the tab. List box is basically going to display our information that we get as a result. So over here on the left side of your designer, you have different objects you can add to your tab. You have button, check boxes, drop-down menus, which we call combo box, a label, which we already discussed, is just text on the form or on the screen, a list box, and text boxes, which you can just type in. So one we're interested in first is just a list box to display our result. So I'm just going to drag this onto my screen here. And you can see the wizard pops up for it again. I'm going to change my name to database result. I want to change the font size. I'll leave it as small. The option for required basically tells it whether the user needs to select this before you can scan a doc. In the case where we had to save the file before, you want the person typically to select a folder before they try and save the document so you know where to put the document. At this point, I'm just going to leave required as no. The button height, we can get into maybe next week. That's not too important at this point. The columns tells you how many columns you should display. 2 is okay for now. The primary column, this is the one that will be used for the data. So if you're displaying maybe a name and a phone number, where the name is the first column and the phone number is the second column, if the information that you're trying to use from the display is really the phone number, you would change your column to, your primary column to 2 instead of the name, because you may be more interested in the phone number. So if I press next items we don't need to concern with. Process reset is not too important at this point. All values, multiple select allows the user to either select only one item, or they could select 10 or 20 or as many as they like. We're just going to say off. And the type. If we look at our PDF, you can see we need the type is a target for this demonstration. You can see if I click on this drop down, there's several different options. Target is the one that we're going to use to search a database. Depending on how complex you want to make the screen or how intelligent, you could select different options, but at this point a target is good for our scenario. So if I click finish, I can actually move this box around. I'm going to make it a little bit larger. Now, if I look at our document here, next thing I want to drag on is a smart search button. And this is probably the easiest way to create just a database search. You can see here over on my left side under the button options, or button objects, we have a smart search. I'm just going to drag this on here and maybe put it right in the middle. I'm going to name this B Search. The name really doesn't have any effect at this point. The font size I'll make medium. The color, we can green again. Next, the target. This is basically, since we're using a search, we need to select which list box would be displaying the result. Since we only have one list box on our form, it automatically selects it. The text that I'd like to put on here would be search. Next, auto search basically tells it whether it should search before it displays. If you don't have a search before it displays, it'll just leave the box empty. So I'm going to turn auto search on, so that as soon as you log in, it will automatically display the result. The search text is basically what you want to search with. This is, the user can enter this at any point, but this is only really used if you want to use the auto search, so it displays when you first log in. If you leave it at blank, it'll return all the results. So that's what I'm going to leave here, is just not type anything here. And the type here is going to be a database. You can see that we have different options. You have custom database, and DLL. We'll get into those options maybe a little bit later or possibly next week, depending on how far we go today. So the value that we want for now is just a database. I'm going to click next. And here it shows me my DSM. Typically with Reform, we use ODBC connections. So if I go to my control panel, it's kind of a neat feature of MOST, and I go to Administrative Tools, we have our ODBC connections. And if I just look at my system DSN, you see I have FS Monitor Data Source, Reform Lookup Database, and WriteFact. You can see MOST automatically list those for me I don't have to memorize the data source name. It makes it much easier to make sure you have the correct information. The one that we're going to use for the sample is FS Monitor Data Source. So once we have our DSN selected, we go next, and it may take a second or two, and what it's actually doing is pulling the databases that you can, or the tables that you can select. Here, if you look at your values, Reform automatically selects a number of tables depending on what you choose to install as plugin. But no matter what you choose, you should have this sample data value. So if you can, look through that list for sample data, and once you find that, just simply press next, and it'll ask you for parameter. Now the parameter is basically what you want to search by. In this case, we're just going to say maybe the first name. You can see there's another option, and this is basically a list of columns in our table. Again, you don't have to memorize the column name itself. You can simply select it from this list. So what we're going to search by is first name, and press next. And you can see here I have my button. Now what I'd like to do, if we look back at our PowerPoint, I need to modify which columns I'd like to display in my list box. So if I select my button here, I can come over here to the right side to Object Properties, and I have this option called Columns. To select this, there's a little button here with 3 dots that I can select. I click on this, you have this little pop-up window that comes up for Column Editor. What this allows you to do is basically select what you'd like to display as your result. So if you remember, our list box has 2 columns. So what I'm going to display is first name. So if I select first name here, and I press the plus button, it'll add it to my list, and I'm just going to add last display that second. So my first column is going to have first name, my second column will display last name for my database. If I look back at my PowerPoint, there's 2 more things that we need to put onto a tab that are usually pretty important. A log off button, which allows the user to log off, because if you don't add this, then there's no way for them to really disconnect without the connection timing out, or without the user using the display in that timeout. And a process button. A process button is basically like your scan button. You can actually use the green circle on the MFP if you like, whichever is easier. But you need a process button to be on the tab. Since we're just doing a database lookup, the process button is not too important. But like I said, we need a logout button so we can exit the screen if we needed to. I'm just going to leave this the default settings. I'm going to change text to log off, and I'm going to save my settings. So I just want to save my screen here. When we save the screen, it's automatically updated just like before. If I open up my emulator, I can log out. And when I log back in using demo, and here we have in my save to file collection, because that's what I selected when I went through the wizard, I have manual, LDAP, and these 2 were originally here. And now I have my STF sample, which is, actually I named that wrong. That should have been database sample. That's okay. So when I click on this, you can see it displays the screen that I just designed. Now here we have 5 entries from our database, and this automatically displayed them because we turned on that option for the search button. So if I press search and say I want to look for John, I could type John. I press OK, and you can see it comes back with John Smith and John Nelson because those both met my search criteria. I'm only searching by my first name, and I entered John. Now, if I wanted everybody in that list again, what I could do is press search, and instead of entering a string, I just leave it blank, and I press OK. And you see it lists everybody once again. Same thing if I wanted to search for, let's say, what's a good letter? I search for anybody with the letter E in their name. So I'm just going to type E, anybody with the letter M as their first letter. And you can see Mike comes up. So you can see this automatically connects to the database rather easily using these wizards. If I was to open up my database viewer application, I could actually show you this information as well as the other columns in there that we could easily select as well.